The explosion at Yellowstone lasted only seconds, but the danger it unleashed stretched on for days. The danger began the moment the ground at Biscuit Basin tore open on the morning of June 13th. That first blast was not the end of the story. It was only the very opening scene. Over the following week, scientists watched the Earth keep collapsing inward and forming new openings in the ground. By the end of this, you will understand exactly why scientists are calling this particular event unprecedented. 12 days ago, in the pre-dawn darkness of Saturday, June 13th, monitoring equipment inside Biscuit Basin activated. At 9 minutes past 5 in the morning, Mountain Daylight Time, sensors first detected something deeply abnormal. This was not the slow, familiar background heat signature typical of a resting thermal spring in summertime. It was a sharp, seismic burst paired with infrasound, a low-frequency pressure pulse below human hearing entirely. The signal pointed in the direction of Black Diamond Pool, roughly 2 miles northwest of Old Faithful. If you follow Yellowstone news at all, that name already carries a certain familiar and unsettling weight. Black Diamond Pool has become one of the most infamous thermal features in Yellowstone's long, turbulent history. Any significant seismic signal from its direction demands immediate attention from every scientist on the monitoring team. In July 2024, Black Diamond Pool produced one of the most dramatic hydrothermal explosions ever caught on camera. It hurled water, mud, and rock between 400 and 600 feet straight up into the sky. Debris rained down across an area of roughly 1 square kilometer in every direction from the blast site. The boardwalk was destroyed, and every visitor on it ran for their lives as chaos erupted around them. The entire event lasted approximately 55 seconds. And by something close to a miracle, nobody was seriously hurt. Biscuit Basin has been fully closed to all public visitors every day since the July 2024 explosion. So when the instruments lit up before dawn on June 13th, the first assumption was immediately obvious. Everyone immediately assumed that Black Diamond Pool had detonated again in a second major hydrothermal explosion event. But the data very quickly stopped fitting that story. And that is exactly where things get genuinely interesting. The temperature sensors sitting inside Black Diamond Pool itself barely moved in response to the seismic signal. If the pool had genuinely detonated again, those internal sensors should have spiked immediately and violently without question. Instead, sensors registered only a small change. Something had clearly exploded. But not from Black Diamond Pool. The seismic and acoustic signals left absolutely no doubt that a real and significant explosion had taken place. But the explosion had not come from the famous pool that everyone had been carefully watching so closely. The real answer came from a camera installed at the site the previous year. In May of 2025, at 9 minutes and 50 seconds past 5, the camera recorded a dark plume of steam rising rapidly. That steam was rising not from Black Diamond Pool, but from barren, unremarkable ground just to its north. The Earth had torn open in a spot with no famous feature and no history of notable activity. For years, all attention at this location had been fixed on one specific and increasingly famous thermal pool. And on June 13th, the ground opened right beside that pool in a spot nobody had been watching. That single detail is the thread running through this entire story from beginning to end. When geologists reached the site, they found not one new hole in the ground, they found 3. 3 separate sets of freshly formed vents had been punched into the earth just north of the pool. Each vent was a brand new opening in the ground that had not existed before that same morning. Large volumes of near-boiling hydrothermal water surged out of those vents and flowed downhill into the Firehole River. By the time scientists arrived, most vents had stopped flowing, but the northernmost one was still active. That northern vent connected to a crack in the ground stretching roughly 18.5 meters long. In places, that fracture gaped open as wide as 1.5 meters, roughly 5 feet across. Picture a fissure, longer than a school bus and wide enough in places to swallow a person completely. All of this tore open in one morning from ground that had been completely solid just hours before. The water pouring from those vents measured around 90 degrees Celsius, essentially boiling given Yellowstone's high elevation. This was not warm runoff seeping gently. This was near boiling water forced up under enormous underground pressure. The scale of the discharge became visible from miles away in what it did to the Firehole River. Downstream from Biscuit Basin, The river visibly changed color in the hours following the June 13th explosion. It turned pale milky gray, the unmistakable color of water carrying an enormous load of fine sediment. That discoloration carried roughly 6 kilometers downstream, drifting steadily toward the Midway Geyser Basin below. The gray water was a physical receipt, direct proof the underground plumbing had just flushed itself out. The ground had effectively emptied part of its own interior straight out into the river within hours. But as it turned out, the ground at Biscuit Basin was far from finished with its dramatic performance. Here is the part of this story that has absolutely no real scientific precedent in any existing record. In the days after June 13th, scientists observed something brand new form where nothing had existed before. A brand new boiling pool appeared near the middle vents, gray and thick with suspended mineral sediment. Most new Yellowstone features form as explosion craters, holes punched outward, surrounded by rings of ejected rock. This new pool was fundamentally different, and the difference reveals something crucial about the forces operating underground. According to the USGS, this pool did not form through an explosion in the conventional sense at all. It formed through collapse. The ground itself caved inward into the hot, pressurized zone directly beneath it. The resulting depression slowly filled with near-boiling water, creating a thermal feature that had never existed before. The original blast happened on June 13th, but this new pool formed between June 14th and June 16th. In other words, the explosion was not the end of the event, it was the very beginning. A longer process of underground reorganization kept quietly reshaping the ground for days after the initial blast. The new collapse pool measured 21 feet by 17 feet, where solid ground had stood just days before. That pool did not just sit there quietly filling up. It became something far more energetically active. By June 18th, 5 days after the blast, that new pool had begun erupting entirely on its own. It threw water 6 to 9 meters into the air, the height of a 2 to 3 story building. It erupted in sustained, multi-minute bursts, like a newborn geyser on ground where no geysers had ever existed. There is something particularly unsettling about a feature that forms through slow collapse rather than through direct explosion. An explosion is a single violent release, frightening certainly, but over within seconds, and then completely done. Collapse is slower and more gradual, and in some ways far more revealing about what truly hides underground. Collapse means the ground had been so thoroughly hollowed out below that it could no longer support itself. The surface sank silently, days after the initial blast, slowly giving way into the scalding zone below. In the meantime, the surface above all of this had looked completely and perfectly intact the entire time. A person could have walked right across it and had absolutely no reason to suspect any danger whatsoever. And then on its own quiet schedule, and with no warning at all, the Earth silently gave way. Scientists were literally standing on that very ground in the days before it caved into near-boiling water. That fact alone raises the question that makes this particular event scientifically priceless above almost anything before it. The most important number in this entire story is 100 meters, roughly 328 feet. That is the distance between the June 13th explosion and the nearest scientific monitoring station in the area. That station had been installed by the Yellowstone Volcano Observatory only the previous summer, in May of 2025. According to the USGS, no hydrothermal explosion in recorded history has ever happened this close to dedicated instruments. This is the closest range science has ever had on a live hydrothermal event as it actually occurred. To understand why proximity matters, you need to see the striking contrast with what happened in July 2024. In July 2024, when the larger explosion tore through Biscuit Basin, there was no dedicated monitoring station nearby. The observatory's broader network barely registered it, nearly missing one of the most dramatic blasts in park history. Scientists were left studying the aftermath alone, working backward from scattered debris with almost no real-time recorded data. Distance destroys data quality in ways that matter enormously when studying the precise mechanics of a hydrothermal explosion. A seismometer miles away records only a smeared, faint wiggle when a hydrothermal explosion fires beneath the Earth. A seismometer just 100 meters away captures the sharp, detailed fingerprint of rock fracturing in real time. An infrasound sensor right beside the vent captures the exact acoustic signature of steam breaking through the earth. Not a muffled echo arriving seconds late, but the precise sound of the actual ground tearing itself open. An on-site camera timestamps the entire sequence to the half second and identifies exactly which ground opened first. Multiply that across 4 different instrument types, all running simultaneously within a football field's distance of the blast. And you get something this entire scientific field has essentially never had access to in its entire history. A clean, close-range, multi-sensor recording of a hydrothermal explosion from right inside its own immediate neighborhood. This time the situation was completely reversed from everything that came before in Yellowstone monitoring history. A seismometer, infrasound sensor, temperature probe, and camera, all recording from just 100 meters of the explosion. Every one of those instruments was recording from 100 meters away when the Earth finally opened up. For the first time in history, scientists may have a close-range recording of how these events actually begin. The seismic signature beforehand, the acoustic pulse, the thermal behavior, all recorded from inside the explosion's neighborhood. The central question is what those instruments captured in the crucial moments directly before the explosion occurred. To understand why that question matters, you need to know what actually drives these events underground at Yellowstone. Beneath those thermal basins, hot water circulates constantly through a dense maze of shallow cracks within the rock. That water carries dissolved silica picked up from the surrounding rock as it circulates at depth underground. As the water rises toward the surface and gradually cools, that dissolved silica comes out of solution entirely. It deposits on the walls of underground channels, slowly building a hard, glassy mineral coating over many years. And here is where the trap forms. That silica coating is essentially completely impermeable to any water flow. As that coating thickens over years, it eventually seals an underground pathway that had been safely venting heat. Once a conduit seals, the trapped hot water and steam beneath it have nowhere left to escape to. Pressure builds steadily. Temperature climbs relentlessly. Superheated water accumulates under growing pressure below a hard mineral seal. Think of it as a natural pressure cooker buried just feet beneath ground that millions visit every summer. It stays stable and looks perfectly normal from above until the moment the confining rock finally gives way. When the seal fails, pressure drops instantly, and superheated water flashes into steam in a split second. That expanding steam either blows the ground violently outward or causes the surface to collapse downward instead. The 2024 Black Diamond Pool explosion is the clearest example of the violent outward version of this mechanism. The days after June 13th showed the world the collapse version of that exact same underlying process. Both outcomes are products of the same basic process: trapped heat and enormous pressure just below the surface. Now connect that mechanism back to those instruments sitting 100 meters from where all of this happened. The most valuable thing those instruments could capture is any precursor signal before the underground seal finally failed. A slow temperature creep, a shift in infrasound, or tiny micro-earthquakes as the surrounding rock began to crack. If that signal shows up in the data, scientists gain their first real foothold on forecasting these events. The ability to say, even minutes ahead, that a specific patch of ground is about to give way. But scientists are being honest about a darker possibility, that the close-range data might end up confirming instead. The 2024 explosion gave essentially no advance warning, according to every available instrument reading at the time. If the new close-range data also shows nothing, if the ground was completely silent right until it exploded, then the most unsettling version of this hazard is confirmed these events can strike with zero detectable warning. No advance signal of any kind, in terrain where millions of visitors walk every single summer season. Either answer is a major finding, the first time we have ever had data to properly determine which. June 13th did not come out of nowhere. It is the latest chapter in 2 years of unrest. That previous chapter is the reason any of us know the name Black Diamond Pool at all today. Rewind to July 23rd, 2024, just before 10 in the morning. With tourists standing on the boardwalk, Black Diamond Pool exploded without meaningful warning and shot a plume of mud, rock, and scalding water skyward. The plume reached between 400 and 600 feet, raining debris across a full square kilometer of ground. Visitors ran for their lives. The boardwalk was destroyed, and by sheer luck, nobody was killed. It was not the supervolcano stirring, not magma on the move, not any kind of volcanic precursor signal. It was a purely shallow hydrothermal explosion, the same pressure cooker mechanism, just on a larger destructive scale. And Biscuit Basin has remained completely closed from that day forward, approaching 2 full consecutive years of closure. Black Diamond Pool did not stay quiet after that first blast. It has kept erupting repeatedly ever since. A muddy eruption in December 2025 also went mostly unwitnessed, simply because the basin had been closed. But instruments and trained observers kept quietly noting and recording every single event as it unfolded underground. An entire basin inside America's most famous national park has been fenced off for nearly 2 straight years. That sustained closure is the Park Service's clearest statement that the ground there is simply not yet safe. Every smaller eruption since 2024 has only reinforced that judgment rather than moving toward any closure reversal. Step back and see the full pattern, because when you see it clearly, something important becomes obvious. Major explosion in 2024, eruptions through 2025, and in June 2026, a fresh blast and days of collapse. That is not a system that blew once and then quietly and gradually settled back into stable equilibrium. That is a shallow underground plumbing network that has been actively reorganizing itself for nearly 2 full years. Finding new weak points, opening new pathways upward, stubbornly refusing to return to any kind of stable rest. The 2024 blast, in hindsight, looks far less like a one-off accident and more like the opening act. June 13th is what that ongoing underground failure looks like from the surface, captured in real time. And that is precisely why the online reaction to these events consistently misrepresents the actual danger so completely. Every time Yellowstone does anything unusual, the same wave of dramatic claims floods across the internet within hours. The supervolcano is waking up. The government is hiding an eruption. The warning signs are already here. Online, new vents and rising steam get treated as final warnings before a continent-ending blast. They are not. The data flatly contradicts the super eruption story, and does so without leaving any room for interpretation. Yellowstone's volcano alert level remains at normal, the lowest possible designation on the entire monitoring scale. The aviation color code remains green and throughout May. The whole park recorded only 45 small earthquakes. The largest measured just magnitude 2.0, a tremor you would not feel even standing directly above the source. There were no earthquake swarms, no significant ground deformation, and no magmatic signals within the broader volcanic system. A hydrothermal explosion is a shallow steam event driven by pressurized groundwater, not by magma movement at depth. It is not a precursor to any caldera eruption. The underlying science on that point is abundantly clear. But here's the part that doom mongers consistently get backwards, and it is genuinely worth pausing to consider. There is a real hazard at Yellowstone. It is simply not the one featured in any disaster movie. The honest danger is not lava, not magma, and not a supervolcano blast ending civilization on the continent. The real danger is a thin, sealed crust holding near boiling water just beneath where tourists walk every summer. In 2024, that thin crust destroyed a boardwalk full of people just moments after they managed to flee. The fear driving the supervolcano panic is real and understandable. It is just aimed at the wrong target. People fear a magma chamber miles underground, when the real threat is the thin ground beneath their feet. The most realistic danger inside America's first national park is not buried deep underground in any magma chamber. It hides just a few feet beneath the ordinary-looking ground that millions of visitors stand on every summer. The Yellowstone Volcano Observatory now holds a data set unlike anything it has ever had access to before. The central question is whether those instruments captured any genuine precursor signal before the blast occurred. If precursor signals appear in the data, it represents the first real step forward in forecasting these events. The ability, even minutes ahead, to warn that a specific patch of ground is about to give way. But if the data shows nothing, if the ground was completely silent right until the moment it blew, Then the most unsettling conclusion is confirmed. This ground can give way with absolutely no advance notice. The new collapse pool will also tell us something. Whether it stabilizes or keeps spouting will reveal much. Whether the underground system is still actively reorganizing, or whether it is beginning to settle down at last. The supervolcano is not waking up. The data on that particular question could not be more abundantly clear. But the ground inside Yellowstone's thermal basins has now demonstrated in unprecedented detail exactly what it can do. It can tear open, collapse inward, and boil over for days with little or no warning at all. And the most realistic danger inside America's first national park is not buried in any magma chamber underground. It hides silently just a few feet beneath the ordinary ground that people are standing on right now. That ground is thin, that seal is fragile, and the boiling water directly below is patient and permanent.